Shalom and welcome to another edition of the Daily Bread where we discuss the weekly Torah portion. And this week's Torah portion is the third Parashat of the book of Bereshit, also called Genesis, and it's called Lech Lecha, which means go out. And my message for 2011-12 is called Just Weights. And in this Parashat, I'm going to talk about just weights and how this week's Parashat kind of ties into this concept of knowing the right weights, having accurate weights, and what that means to all of us as followers of Elohim. So it starts off with Avram being asked to leave his home and his kindred and his country and go to the place that YHWH will show him. And so when we start off, we look at this and we say, gosh, this is a pretty big thing. What is it? I like to look at the core, the mechanics of what's being asked. So we say, well, what is God really asking him to do? You know, what is it about your home, your family, your country that, you know, that has value? Because we're talking about the values or the weights of things. You know, what do you get out of a home? Well, you get a lot of things. You get protection. You get comfort and support. And if we look at just those three things alone, protection, comfort, and support, and we say now, why would Elohim ask Avram to leave behind those things? Is that something necessary? Well, when you follow Elohim, I think you're going to find that the old protection that you used to have, right, from the world, right, and the way the world protects its own, right? If you know, the world does not protect those that are different a lot of times. A lot of times conformity kind of cloaks and covers the world. So just like Israel, when they were obeying Paro, they were fine. It's when they wanted to start going out and worshiping their Elohim that Paro said, wait a minute, now I got a problem with you. When you were just my slaves, that was one thing. You were my servants. Now you're saying you want to go and serve somebody else. And that's where he started to come against them. And we're going to see that theme later on in this Parashat. So we start off with this concept that the world really protects its own through conformity. And so at the time of Avram, there were people worshiping all kinds of idolatry and other gods and stuff like that. And so for Avram to reject those, and many of them just kind of pick and chose their favorite gods, whatever suited their needs. They made a little buffet of idols. Typically you had one idol for this, one idol for that. You had all your various idols. Well, here you have Avram being asked to leave his home, to leave that stuff behind, leave that protection, right? Because now he'd kind of be an outcast. If he starts coming out and saying, hey, wait, we can't have any of these other gods. Actually, these other gods are wrong, and we need to only have the gods that we're having. Then that's going to face ridicule and persecution. Then you're going to say comfort. He's not going to have that comfort of what he used to know. He's going to have to leave that behind because it isn't right. And so he's going to feel that instability. And so we've got comfort. We've got protection and support. He's not going to have any support either as he goes out and follows Elohim and does these things. His support, right, is going to have to be Elohim. Elohim's going to have to be his provision and his support throughout this. So this is the foundation of his faith. So we start off with a series of quiz. Basically, what's greater? What's of greater value, your home or Elohim? Your family or Elohim? Your country or Elohim? And all of these, I'm not going to get too in detail, but all of them have quite a few in-depth meanings. And they foreshadow what a follower of YHWH may have to give up. Because it talks about, about your enemies being those of your own household. And I know we've seen it ourselves when we started following YHWH. We saw, there were people in our family who rejected what we were doing. There, your bosses may reject it when you start saying, well, I can't work on the Sabbath. Your friends, even our Christian friends, when we start coming to the conclusion that we need to be keeping the Torah, and that some of the things were lies, then our Christian friends, they don't just say, oh, no big deal, we'll let them do what they did. They come after you trying to disprove it, because if you're right, you'll bring into question the things that they believe, and so they come against you. So everything that you knew, all what you previously had, a support system and protection and comfort and all that, a lot of that has to be left behind when you choose to follow YHWH. So next we see that in this series of things that he starts right off with Avram to say, you're going to have to leave all this behind. Come follow me, and I'll take you to this place. And really, what it's saying is what you know. Everything that you know, you have to be willing. Here's another mechanic that happens to Avram right up front. You're going to have to leave behind what you know. And this is about being teachable. You see, if YHWH is going to teach you the truth, you've got to be willing to give up the lie. I don't know if it was Parashat Mishpatim, I think it was, I'm not sure, where the rebellious son, I did a message a little while back, and I talked about this phrase that Mashiach talked about, Satan, about being the father of lies, and what that means. If you're a father of a lie, you're protecting it, you defend it, you cut it slack, your judgment isn't always equal, because it's your baby, you're gonna, people love their kids, even when their kids are being wicked and doing what's wrong. And I drew the picture of how this is when people have lies. When they have things that they believe that aren't true, they'll defend it, they'll protect it, they want it to be true, they'll look for ways it can be true and kind of ignore what people are saying that might be contrary to it. They treat it like it's their child. And the problem with doing that is the rebellious son, the son that goes against the father, which in this case, the belief that you have that goes against the truth, the Torah, the Father, is to be put to death, right? And this is a hard thing for people to do, but I love it. See, people have learned lies, and they love them so much that they can't give them up, and they won't give them up. And that is actually disobedience to the Torah if you're holding on to lies. So we took that pattern and we said, what you know, you have to be willing to give up what you know to follow Elohim, because you aren't all truth. And he's going to show you truth, and it's going to be contrary to what you already believe. You're going to have to get rid of what you believe, leave it behind, to accept the truth. It's kind of like the old saying, you can't get to second base without taking your foot off of first. You see? And that's the thing. You can't get to the truth unless you take your foot off the lies. And so it's an important thing to understand. So Avram's very first thing he's asked to do is to give up all those things that he knew and to leave that behind and to trust Elohim. So this starts to teach us what this path of having just weights is. Now it says when it comes to just weights, how do you have a just weight? You're supposed to have just weights and measures. And that means your ounce is supposed to be an ounce, not a little bit more, not a little bit less. Your ephah is supposed to be an ephah. I mean, all of these things to have. This is why in the Torah you see you're not to add to it or take away from it, because it's about just weights. So if you add a little to it, it's not a just weight anymore. If you take a little from an ounce, it's no longer a perfect ounce. The goal is to have perfect weights and measures. This gives us the right weights and measures to make judgment calls and to make choices. And so when we are in perfect alignment, when we have our weights in line with what the Torah says, when it says you shall not work on the Sabbath, and you don't work on the Sabbath, then you've used the just weights you've given the right weights to the Word of God, and then you've applied that to the situation, and that's helped you make the right choice not to work on the Sabbath. So the problem with a lot of people is they don't know the Torah, they don't know the weights and measures of God, or they're not quite right. They're measuring their measurements and their weights aren't quite right. They kind of got it, but they're keeping the Sabbath, but then they're still eating hot food or going out to eat or doing things that might be prohibited on the Sabbath. They're still doing those things, and so they got the weight, but it's not quite the right weight. And we all have to study and work on those things to understand the weights. And the basic weights of let's just not work, those are, it's pretty easy for everybody to get those. But then you get into the gray areas, and now you're starting to get into the little microns, and you're starting to see, well, okay, this is roughly an ounce. Well, depending if you have a real loose scale, that's an ounce. But as you get a more fine scale that can measure things closer, you start to realize, well, it's not actually a true ounce. And you get into, this is when you get this godly view of real truth. I mean, at its very finest point, we're not there yet. We're all at some kind of zone somewhere in a rough stage where we're still trying to shave that weight down and make that weight exactly right. But everyone walks around thinking they've got all the right weights. Well, for what? For a child? Judgment of a child, that's smaller than judgment of an adolescent. That's smaller than judgment of a man, and smaller than a judgment of a wise man. So, you don't know what you don't know. So Avram is asked to follow YHWH, and he doesn't have full knowledge yet. So he's saying, leave all this behind that you know where your house is, where your tent is, where it is in the city, where that city is around this area, all that. I want you to leave all that behind. And I'm going to take you to a place, but I didn't tell him where it is. So it's this concept of, in this Torah portion, of following without full knowledge. And that's how we follow YHWH. So how can we follow YHWH without the full knowledge, right? I mean, how many people read all of the Torah, study it all out, and then make a decision if they're going to believe in God or not? Not very many people, So most people make the decision first. So that takes us to the next decision, is what was he really being asked to do? What was the choice? He was told to weigh out all these things. What's greater, your home or Elohim? What's more valuable, your family or following Elohim? So he's asked to make all these quick choices here, these ways. And what's he really being asked? What's really being determined by his answers is his desire, right? Does he desire these things more or Elohim more? To be pleasing to Elohim, to obey Elohim. See, at the very core foundation, I think, faith should come from the desire to be pleasing to Elohim. I think if that's your desire, if it isn't a social club, if it isn't salvation, if it isn't blessings or being some chosen people or this promised land or all this and that, I think if you remove all of that, what has to be at the core to really be successful, I think, is to want to be pleasing to Elohim. Because if you just have that, you'll figure all the other parts out. Because then you'll get to the law and you'll go, gosh, it looks like Elohim was pleased with these people who kept the law. And he was displeased when those same people or other people didn't keep the law and obey him. So it looks like to me what's pleasing to God is obedience. So how are you going to read through the Torah and not get that God's pleased with obedience and he's displeased with disobedience? I mean, that's the real message of the whole Bible. And if your desire is to be pleasing to God, then obeying God becomes a natural progression of that, because you can easily see that that is pleasing to God. It doesn't get into all this latter arguments, this minutia about, well, is it about salvation? Is it about being the chosen people? Is it about believing in the resurrection? All these things are so secondary. The core, the heart of the matter is, do you want to be pleasing to God? If you want to be pleasing to God, then you don't need a reward. You don't need salvation. You don't need a promise of eternal life. You don't need a promise of some future kingdom of heaven that you're going to get into. You don't need all this, stuff. Remove it all. Take it all off the table. Figure out why you're interested in God. Because there's many reasons why you could be interested in God. And many of them will fall apart as you get tested harder and harder. And I think it's all going to boil down. If you get in for the rewards, when the rewards are taken away, it's kind of like the story of Eov or Job. Satan says, well, of course he loves you. He obeys you because, look, you've blessed him. You take those blessings away, he'll curse you. But that didn't happen. Because Eov wanted to be pleasing to YHWH. And because of that, that was the foundation of his faith. So he didn't go down the wrong road, even whether he's blessed or he's cursed, doesn't matter. So we got to get and I know that's hard for our society, nowadays where everything is about being self-serving. It's what's in it for me. It's, instant breakfast. We all want something for nothing. I got to get my salvation, so that's why I believe. And whatever it is, there's 100 flavors of enticements for you. But hopefully you find a path that doesn't require enticements. Because if you can be bought, then Satan, what did he do to Mashiach? He brought him up and he showed him all these things and says, I'll give all this to you if you'll bow down. Right? If you can be bought on one side for one price, then another price can be raised for you and you can be bought again at a greater price. So if your desire is to be pleasing to Elohim, you're going to have a foundation that can't be purchased and bribed. And that leads naturally to obedience. So Avram had to follow without full knowledge. He had to have the right desire. And that was a test of his desire. And he chose YHWH. Next we get in this week's Parashat to the little story of Paro or Pharaoh and Sarai. And Avram asks Sarai to say she's his sister and not his wife, because the people of that place will kill him. And it's very interesting because Paro in the scriptures is referenced, or a model of Satan, it says. And as the ruler of this world. And so in this concept, what we see that Paro, he was worried that the people would kill him unless, right, ultimately, they would kill him to take the thing of his value, right? But if they thought they could get it from him, then he'd be fine. And this creates a great picture where I see that the model is that if Satan, it's kind of like the Parashat, or the parable of the wheat and the tares. Let them grow up, right? Every time, even a righteous man can turn to his wickedness. And in some ways, that's probably why Satan doesn't come out and just destroy people, because what you see in the pattern is, you see that once people have really determined that they're gods, right? They belong to God. Not that they are gods. That they belong to God. Then what happens is, Satan comes against them, right? The enemy, the adversary will come against you. Once they put the blood on the doorpost, what happens? They identified themselves as followers of God. So at that point, they left. They're no longer serving Satan. And once they stopped serving Satan, Satan decided, I'm going to go destroy him, right? He just punished them, made things hard on them as long as they were still working for him. But when they left and they're not going to work for him, then he's going to come against them. And we see that pattern, that structure right here with Paro and Sarai. If I could get your wife, if it's your sister, and I can have her, she could sleep with me or serve me or whatever it is, right? If I could have her, then I'm not going to kill you because there's something in it for him, right? But if that's your wife, there's nothing in it for me, then he might be, he might destroy her trying to kill you to take her by force. And so it's kind of an interesting picture that we see when we look at people in religion. Because we see that a lot of people, there's so many ways and so many lines where they can get caught up and end up being part of Satan's. And in a way, that's kind of mercy. Because Satan still thinks he has a chance with you. And that's why he doesn't fully come out against you. See, as long as we're still serving Satan in some areas, which is really kind of almost serving yourself, as we see with the very beginning of the sin. Hava wanted to eat that fruit. It was to serve herself. She could be like Elohim. It looked like it'd be good. She's serving her own desire. And when you see serving your own desire, not having self-discipline and restraint, serving Elohim instead of your own desire, this is what we see with Avram. You got your home, your family, your country. Here's all the things you like. If you'll leave those behind and serve me. This was the big question in the opening of this parasha. So Paro was plagued because he took Sarai. And what we can see is that Sarai is part of Avram. He cannot take her because Avram is following God. So Sarai does not belong with Paro. And so God defends Avram and Sarai against Paro, and Paro sends them away. So next we get to the concept of brothers and right or wrong. You see, we get this concept of Lot. We get this concept where Avram, has to deal with his own family. They're both wealthy, but they can't dwell together. And this to me paints a great picture of how a lot of Messianics are, a lot of religious people are. Everybody's got their own ideas. Everybody is going out there. Many times we can't dwell together because we just can't agree. We're all trying to study the Torah or serve God or do whatever, but you just can't agree with somebody. And so it's hard to dwell together. It's hard to be together when, even though you're part of the same family, you got to separate. And this brings me back to this concept of just weights, that there's many different weights in your bag. Not different weights as far as untrue weights, as it talks about at one point, to have, you might have had an ounce and then one that's a little less than an ounce, a little more than an ounce, so that you could use it to your benefit. I was having, when it talks about a weight great and a small, that's what it was referring to. But I'm talking about different weights, like there's big weights and there's little weights. There's an ounce and there's a pound. And they're all used in different settings for different things. And in the same way, the brothers and sisters, the family of Elohim, there's lots of different people doing different things. They're at different places in their walk. You don't have to, because you're an ounce, look at the gram and say, you're not right because you should be like an ounce. Well, no. Not everybody needs to be in the same spot at the same time, looking at the same thing with the same understanding. As a matter of fact, there's a great, just like in nature, a diverse ecosystem. It helps everybody involved, you see, even though all the parts are different. Part of what's bad in what's plaguing our food supply and our agricultural system is monoculture agriculture, where they're taking this big area and just planting one crop because it's more efficient. But it's screwing up all of the bugs, all the healthy insects and things that are part of that environment, because maybe that's not their food, so it's like a desert to them. They're going through this long wasteland without enough diversity in there that everybody can get what they need. And so you see how this applies when we look at our brothers, that not everybody has to be in the same spot at the same time. Lot's still part of his family. He says, you go over there. You might not be able to dwell right here. You go over there. I'm going to go over here. We're still family. And we know this when they take Lot captive. He doesn't say, oh, well, our herdsmen are fighting. Forget you. I've washed my hands of you. He goes and he protects his family because we're still family. See, even though we might not be able to dwell together, you still have points where you have to come together, and you're still family, and you have those obligations to each other. And I see that all the time on Facebook. People they're like kids. They haven't learned to have a disagreement without hitting each other. You don't have to agree on every point, and that doesn't even necessarily make one right or wrong. Both might be in different places, different rights, and different times, in different scenarios. So, you don't have to, force this conformity to things that can't conform. A rose can't be a lily. It doesn't have to conform one to the other. There's beauties in each one individually. So we get this concept that we learned from this Parashat with Avram, that, you're still brothers, right or wrong. He still came back and he helped his nephew out. So when it came down to it. And you see this illustrated at the same time when the king of Sodom tries to give him the spoils. And he says, I'm not going to take it from you because I don't want you to claim that you made me rich, right? Who makes him rich? Elohim is his source of provision. So he doesn't want the king of Sodom to say, look, I am who made you great, when really it was Elohim. So other people are going to try and take credit for that. And including yourself. Just like the Torah says, because people say, my hand has gotten me this strength. or this wealth by the power of my hand. That isn't true either. So we have to know who to thank. And we have to understand that good or bad, we leave behind. We have just weights and measures, and we leave behind many things, such as giving ourselves credit, giving other people credit. He wasn't willing to give the king of Sodom credit, even if it meant to get a whole bunch of money. He saw that probably as a bad idea. And that's what we have to do. He pulled out his weights and he said he didn't want unjust gain. And not having just weights, which is not to know the truth in the Torah, is the foundations that lead you to having bad judgment, making bad choices. That can lead you to unjust gain. So all these things are in line with understanding Elohim and what he wants for you. So we get down to the last part where we look at this concept of, where he protected the family. He's protecting also the weight, even his wealth. He only allowed his wealth to come from Elohim. And the weights he allowed, so to speak, in his bag, they needed to be the weights of Elohim. He wasn't interested in other things. I see that in religion. A lot of people get in religion for different reasons. I tell people, I didn't get in for a social club. I didn't get in for salvation. I didn't get in like a lot of people did. I decided it was time to obey God. And so I pulled open the Bible. I read the Bible from cover to cover, and I thought, okay, I need to do whatever. I'm going to try this God thing. I'm going to do whatever God says and see how my life turns out, and see if it's successful or if it's not. And I didn't go in with the assumption that I was being forgiven for my sins, or that I was, like so many people got in for so many different reasons. I got in to obey God and do whatever he said. And so I studied his word to figure out what that would look like. And that was a blessing that I didn't have a lot of that baggage going in. But when you go in to look for the weights of God, and then you have to protect them. And the more you have the correct desire, the more your weights will be more accurate. When you have the desire to be pleasing to God, your weights will be more accurate, greater than any other desire you're going to have. There's 1,000 traps outside of that, and you don't want to get caught up in those. So next we get to this concept of the forced and the natural. And this goes into Hagar, right, and Sarai, who becomes Sarah, and Avram becomes Abraham. They get new names. Now what happens is, Sarai doesn't have a child yet, she's barren, and so she tries to go through Hagar and do something that's unnatural. She tries to do it her way. And we see this so much in religion, that so many people are trying to do religion their way. And it's really self-serving. You can find unnatural ways to do things. You can force theologies that serve your purpose. People can twist the scriptures to make them say whatever they want. So whatever your desire is, if you want to work on the Sabbath, or you don't want to work on the Sabbath, or you want to reclassify what work is, or you want to do this and that, you can do all these things, and you can force it. But the blessing isn't going to be there. The blessing is going to be there in the natural way, in doing things the right way, and the obedient way. That's again a problem with our agricultural system. They're trying to force things to grow in lands that are not fertile anymore. They're trying to force them to grow faster. They're trying to take away the natural bugs that eat some of the plants and stuff like that. And some of those plants are provided for those bugs as food. And just like it says God provides for the birds, though they toil not, in our monoculture agricultural system and with pesticides and all that, we're simply saying, look, here's your food, and I'm going to display it all in your environment. We're going to take your environment, and then we're going to spray it with chemicals so that you can't even eat. We're going to put all this food that normally some might be in your environment. We're going to put all this food out there for the bugs. Then we're going to kill all the bugs so they can't eat. I mean, when you look at it, it's very unnatural. The way we farm, the way we do things, it's very unnatural. And it's unnatural for the bugs. It's unnatural for the whole ecosystem. And it ultimately becomes unnatural for us and harmful to us. The fruit of it is not positive. Just like with Hagar. Ishmael was born, he's going to be a great nation, but it wasn't where the promise and the blessing was. And it wasn't going to be the same as doing it the right way, trusting God and doing things the natural way. So we get this whole message of this forced versus the natural in this week's Parashat. And that's requiring you to trust in Elohim. Now, the end of this, we see this concept of adjustments, right? We get these, what do we get? Adjustments. Well, I'm talking about the name changes. Why did Avram go to Abraham? Why did Sarai go to Sarah? Well, Elohim made some adjustments. Because as those people have changed and grown, I think it's symbolic to the fact that they're becoming something different, somebody different. And that is what Elohim does. He's going to ask you to leave behind what you used to know and become something different. And you don't get the name change just because you made the choice to follow him. You see, in a lot of religion, even in Christianity, what we see is, well, it's all about the sign up. We just got to say we believe, and then we get the whole package. Eternal life, salvation, blessings, all that, just because you decided to believe in God. So what? So, like it says in James, the devils believe in God and tremble. But that doesn't save them. You see, the concept is that there's more required. He not only had to agree to, just like with his son Yitzhak, he'll soon be asked to offer. It wasn't enough that he just said okay, or that he walked the 3 days journey. Why not just wait till he takes 2 steps? God knows he was going to do it, and do all that and cut off. No, he has work involved. There's work that's involved in going through this. And it's the same way when we see the circumcision. Circumcision is a tough one. I mean, okay, we got the covenant. Can't we just... You told me I was going to get the covenant. Can't I just get it? What's all this? Got to cut the foreskin off here. I'm a private member. I mean, that's a pretty big thing to ask somebody to do. And couldn't the argument be made that God's word was good enough if he just said he's promising to go to the land, and if I just said I was going to follow him, isn't just our words? Isn't that good enough? But see, there's always work required. Even with when we see with Paro, and we're going to see this again later with the king being plagued with his son again over taking their wife in. He says, even in the innocency of his heart, and then the next king who takes his son's wife, but doesn't do anything because he thought it was her sister, even he still had to have an offering made for him. So even though he was innocent, he didn't know. Just like Paro. Paro got plagued here. He didn't know that was another person's wife. He still got plagued. Why? Because there's still accountability. See, that's something that's taught against in religion everywhere. One of the big teachings is against accountability, and it follows the teachings of our society, which is we don't want to be accountable for our actions. The law has to be done away with because, gosh, I've stole, I've lied, I've done all these things, I'd be accountable. People absolutely don't want to be accountable. All this teaching is just Adam and Chava hiding behind a fig leaf, right? They're naked, but they don't want to admit they're naked. Nakedness in the scriptures is a model of unrighteousness. They had sinned, but they don't want to admit it. They don't want to stand before Elohim naked and ashamed. So, they sow a fig leaf over there. They want to try and cover themselves up to make themselves feel better about their own sin. And if you look at all the bad theologies that are going around today, they all have to do with, at their root, not being accountable. Trying to justify their own sin, trying to feel good, trying to focus and say, hey, I'm saved, blah, blah, blah. Let's not think about all the sins that I've done and all the things that I've done wrong. And I expect to meet God and Mashiach and not even have him think a thing about all the bad things I've done. They want a high five and a reward. And as it says in Revelations, because they don't realize that they're naked and wretched, right? Their sin, it's remaining with them. like it says, like in the New Testament, it says, because they say they see, their sin remains with them. See, if they'd admitted their sin and their unrighteousness and their wickedness. And so what we see is, again, you have all this concept where it's like, if God's going to change your name, then he'll change it. I know it's very popular in the Messianic movement. A lot of people changing their name to Messianic names and doing all, giving themselves a new name and all this. I can't see it. I don't get that. Your Father has the authority to name you, right? It'd be like the animals, right? Adam named the animals. How about the animals just start renaming themselves? Rhino says, hey, I don't want to be a rhino. I want to be called a horse now. You know? It just doesn't work that way. The authority was given to Adam to name the animals. And what he named them, that was their name. They don't have the authority to change their name. See, name in Hebrew also means authority. And you don't change your own authority. A change in your authority has to happen from somebody in greater authority than you. So your Father could change your name. God could change your name. Both of those have the authority to step in and do that. A lot of people just change their own name arbitrarily. Well, I'm going to be called, and it's something, glorious, Yehuda ben HaNevi, blah, blah, it's this, and I'm the prophet, and it's great, and all that. I don't see that. I don't see a pattern where people change their own name in the scriptures. See, when we get to this concept of name change, God changed your name when he feels you're ready to have a new name. And Avram was already being righteous along the way. He'd left his family, he'd starting to do all this and stuff. Avram didn't change his own name, and God didn't change his name the second he decided to step out of his home. There's things that come along. Again, this whole concept is that everybody's going to get this reward, that I choose my own reward, right? Because if I say I believe in God, I should have salvation and eternal life and all that just guaranteed right now. I'm going to give it to myself by just choosing, right? The same people who say your works don't matter are the same people who just gave themselves a great reward by one work, by saying they believe in God. They give themselves salvation, eternal life, and all this, blah, blah, blah. But then they turn around and say, well, no, you can't earn it. But they just did it. See, what they're really saying is, don't you try and bring those responsibilities on me. I gave it to myself by just saying I believe. And I don't want you trying to say either I don't have it, or there's other things I actually have to do. See, this goes to circumcision. You got to do something, and it ain't fun. And the sign of the covenant will be there when you put it there. Not just because you said so. And all the rewards don't come to you the minute you take your first step out of your home, your family, and your country. You see, this is about just weights. And those weights have to be refined. They have to be refined and refined and refined and become more and more exact. And the lie is that we already have just weights. We don't have just weights. Our judgment isn't righteous. It is a process we have to constantly try and refine and become more and more righteous. And the great lie is that we don't have to. Or more importantly, that you shouldn't. And then those people will come against you. Well, I don't see anywhere in the scriptures where God's telling anybody or punishing them for being too righteous. I don't see anywhere where people are discouraged from righteousness. The only people that I see in the patterns of the Torah where they discourage people from righteousness were like the spies who discouraged the people saying we can't go in to take the good land. People who were discouraged from obeying God were always the people who were being punished by God, not the people being rewarded. So don't let people try and tell you that a pound is really an ounce, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to say there is no right measures, or the measure is much smaller than what it is. And these are liars and cheats. They're lying to themselves to convince themselves, and worse will be if they convince you. Because Hava ultimately ate the fruit that was forbidden because she wanted to. She can't blame the devil. The devil didn't make her do it. The devil just told her what she wanted to hear, and ultimately the adversary that we have to fight against is ourselves. It's serving our own desires. Because all those sins, they all lead to your own desire. You're going to murder somebody, it's from your own anger. You're going to steal from somebody, it's for your own gain. You're going to commit adultery, it's for your own lust. You're going to lie, it's for your own gain. If you're going to covet, it's for your own gain. All of these sins that are out there, they're for you to serve yourself. Everybody's blaming the devil and Satan. Well, look in the mirror. The person, the beneficiary of your sin is yourself. And the chooser of your own sin is yourself. And nobody made you do anything. They can say, hey, the adversary can certainly bring things to light. He can show you, look at all this, I'll give all this to you. Look at what you'll get, is what he's really saying, if you disobey God. But you have to choose. You can't blame anybody. Just like Adam and Hava, it always goes back to the beginning, the Bereshit. You can't blame others for your sin, you chose it. If you want to blame somebody, you can blame yourself for your righteousness, because you also chose that. And that's a better thing to blame yourself for than for your sin. So, until next time, this was Just Weights. I pray that we can all refine our weights and get aligned with the truth and with what God's weights are, and learn to desire to please Him, and let that be the well that everything else springs out of, and all of our obedience springs out of. Till next time, I'm going to say Shalom.